hopefully after our next speaker is Kelly Cooper. Kelly's an irrigator and a farmer and manages the Oaks Irrigation Research Test Site. Before that, he worked on conservation cropping systems for quite a few years as a crop consultant. So Kelly, if you're ready to go, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Tom. Hopefully you can hear me.
Sounds good.
I will get my presentation fired up. Okay, can you see that? Probably not.
Not yet.
Okay, share screen.
There you go.
There, how about that?
Preview of your,
all right. All right, good deal. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy to be here, wherever here is. I guess I can finally use that phrase. I'll get right going, give you a brief update of some of the things we were working on at the Oaks Irrigation Research Site. Of course, I always got to give a thank you to the people that make this happen. Bob and Elsie Titus, who so generously donated land to us. So we have a place to work. Blaine Schatz, my boss. Leonard Biesman, who still answers his phone. He retired a few years ago, but he's a wealth of knowledge. Seth Nelson, Heidi Esslinger, and Spencer Esslinger, and Christine Helverson, all the crew and the site. Really appreciate their efforts and work. Major sponsors: Garrison Diversion, North Dakota Corn Council, North Dakota Soybean Board, NDSU Carrington Research Extension Center, and Oaks area businesses and individuals who are a tremendous help in keeping things going. 2020 studies. It was basically a good year for growing crops at Oaks. Big advantage we have at our site is that the soils are very well drained and we don't have any water table issues. We just have one little wet spot. And with all the rain that we had this year, that actually did get to be have a little bit of water, but it wasn't much more than about 50, 60 feet. Crops that we grew: corn, soybeans, dry beans, potatoes, onions, rye, spring wheat, cover crops, lentils, and brand new this year was CBD oil hemp. Study objectives: basically about any agronomic question you would have growing crops around here, and especially with some of these new things. I'll just kind of skip through these maps. That was our studies that we had this year. Blaine was good enough to find some resources to get another tractor this year. And as you can see, we have twins. We actually, when we checked the serial numbers, these two tractors were made one right after the other, which is kind of cool. One thing we're able to do, of course, when you have one vehicle and you get another one, you can kind of learn from it. One of our researchers needed continuous potatoes, and we weren't able to offer that because we had to have a spray track with we were limited to 5-foot center wheel track. So I got to thinking about it, and we had our rims made. I'm sure some of you are wondering why in the heck I have these tires on backwards, but we're able to flip these tires around so we can go on a 6-foot wheel track, so we can go down the potato rows. Therefore, we don't need a dedicated spray track, and we can have continuous potatoes, which is part of the requirements in some of the research, especially in varieties. We got our new sprayer going this year, so now we have 2 sprayers, and with 2 tractors, hopefully I won't have to spray in the night anymore, which I was always a little bit nervous about doing. So a brief look at the weather. Last spring was extremely wet around here. I think some other parts of the state it was too. I mean, it was really to the point, if you didn't have tile drainage or exceptionally well-drained soils, you probably had prevent plant. I remember taking a trip to Aberdeen midsummer, and it was just mile after mile of unplanted crops either side of the road. And I think once you got a ways to the east, it got a little bit better, but we were probably about in a bullseye of really exceptionally wet. I know a lot of my neighbors, they were lucky to get 30% of their acres in. We didn't have really any big windstorms at the site. We did have a little bit of green snap, nothing of significance. Probably the biggest problem we had with the weather, we had a hailstorm on August 24th, and it did do some damage to the onions. Onions are particularly vulnerable at that stage. If the leaves get damaged, you'll get some dead tissue, bacteria moves in, and that'll move right down through the neck into the rings. Growing degree days were much better this year than they were last year. Our first frost was a little bit earlier this year than what we'd had before. It was 32 degrees on September 8th, 28 degrees the next day. However, I don't think this was really enough to stop the corn. The corn all matured very nicely and dried down nice. September 30th, 2,432 heat units. It wasn't a lot over the 5-year average. In fact, it was just, looking at NDON data, 7 degrees under the 5-year, but it was 147 over the long-term average. Okay, just looking here, we talked about the temperatures a little bit. You can see June, this is 2020 versus 2019. It was a nice summer. We had some good heat, especially this August, 70 degrees versus 66. That helped things out. It is a little confounding. In September and October, we had cold stretches, and then we had some very nice stretches. Rainfall, comparing the 2 years, just looking here, you can see last year, 3 inches in May, 5 inches in June. Really pumped things up, 5 inches in September, 3 inches in October, where this year, the big highlight, we started wet, of course, but this 8.5 inches in June really filled everything up. A lot of people are going to try to get in and put in cover crop, and then June hit, and I heard a lot of people say it was even wetter in June than it was in the spring. But now with lower rainfall here as of late, no snow, things are looking better. Just a couple action shots. This is Dr. Michael Wunsch planting dry beans into rye. This was the 2nd year of his study, looking at the possible suppression by having a green crop out there before you plant dry beans or soybeans for that matter too. It just tricks the apothecia to produce the spores early when there's no beans out there, and so hopefully there's nothing left for the beans by the time they come up for infection purposes. We had quite a few potato plots again this year. Of course, I was an old potato agronomist, so it's always interesting to see what's going to happen there. We even had a little bit of fun with Dr. Thompson brought us down some what we call fun potatoes. We had purple potatoes, we had red skin potatoes with yellow flesh, we had purple skin potatoes with yellow flesh, and kind of like an Easter egg hunt when you're digging these things up. And our new crop this year, every time I went out there, it made me paranoid that the cops were going to come and bust us. Growing hemp. Early July, I think it was just before the 4th of July, one of the company salesmen that supply us onion seed called and asked me if we had some room for some CBD oil hemp. Well, under the university system, we are allowed to grow hemp. I checked it out with Blaine and he said, go ahead. So a couple of things that jumped out. We had poor stands, only had about 20–30%. In fact, we planted 3 times and got about the same result. I think one of the main things is this may be hard to do in the sand because evidently you can't have any rain or irrigation afterwards. That messes up the stand, and actually to kind of push that a little bit, I took some soybean seed treatment and applied it to the seeds. Didn't change things at all. The other, while they grew nice, what came up grew really nice. But at the end of the year, had a really heavy infestation of aphids. Just on a quick Google search, I see that there is a cannabis aphid. I wasn't able to get that identified, but it did have a slight yellowish color. And there's quite a bit of, well, the old hemp from World War I grows locally. Ditchweed is the old reference, probably is harboring a resident supply of these aphids. And the industry kind of likes organic. I think, in fact, it's very strong towards organic. So chemistry is going to be limited on what we can use. Just on some of the active ingredients, of course, I think, you know, everybody from the old days was familiar with THC. CBD oil is what you hear about. I'm just doing a little bit of a quick searching. There's actually 60 types of, if I can pronounce this, cannabinoids. There's other cannabinoids that are active besides CBD. And then also terpenes. This stuff that we grew smelled just like skunk. I mean, it was strong, kind of strong enough to make your eyes water in some cases. You could always tell which way the wind was, in fact. So some of these things can have therapeutic properties. This myrcene, I just pulled this off the internet. I think this is part of the skunk smell. Supposedly relaxing properties and anti-inflammatory properties. And then limonene, second most abundant terpene. That supposedly has powerful antifungal and antibacterial properties. These things kind of sound like ads from the 20s on some products. But just talking to people, a lot of people are using CBD oil, and they're saying that it works for them. So if you're interested in getting into this, I think it's going to be like any other specialty crop. You're going to have to do a lot of research on, like I said, I'd really be careful of these aphids. And then obviously these different varieties are going to make a difference on what kind of extractant you're going to look at. Okay, just also a quick search in the internet. You can buy equipment to do distillation or extraction. And it's you could actually do this with a rice cooker in your kitchen, or you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was interesting in this one particular one, it gives you a payout. Only 22 days to pay out, these $100,000 equipment. Of course, we all know that marketing and getting the stuff sold is always the biggest challenge. We always figure out how to grow this stuff, but it's getting it sold. But obviously, I think there's going to be enough quality issues that you might be able to find some niche markets. All right, other crops, as I mentioned, the corn matured easily this year. Heat units were, of course, way better. Yields are good, but not exceptional. Earlier planting was better. I don't know how much time I have, but just one quick note. I was working with 60-inch corn this year and working with an 82-day variety. And it wasn't apples to apples within the same trial, but when it was planted earlier in the year, it appeared to yield 40 bushels better than later in May. And in both cases, matured easily, was dry at harvest, test weight was good. But obviously something goes on with corn. It likes getting in the ground earlier. Soybeans, kind of the same story, matured easily. Best combining I ever had on the site. One thing to note, we had year-long dicamba drift. Talked to several other area farmers, kind of said the same thing. If they had non-dicamba tolerant beans, I don't think it really hurt the yields. Yields were good, but not exceptional. It was not a good year for white mold. So therefore it was not a good year to do white mold research either. Dry beans, just one thing to pass along to you guys. I think most all of you have heard this, but I got burned with sulfentrazone this year. We planted, sprayed, and then just as the beans are coming up, we had some high winds and some heavy rain, and the navy beans really got nailed. The rest of the varieties, not so much, but navy beans, not so good. Okay, the 60-inch corn. you know, everything about the 60-inch corn I was happy with, except what obviously is the really big thing is the yields are not consistent. We did do a large, well, one of our dryland variety trials. I repeated it in 60-inch, and we had 95% of the yield in the 60-inch, but some of our other trials, we were as low as 20, 30% of yields. Just want to show a shot here. My board member and old buddy Joe Brecker went into the 60-inch corn in a big way. He built himself a custom corn planter so that he was able to do paired rows and single rows and 30-inch rows. And kind of like what I ended up with, if you didn't plant a cover crop, the yield was about the same. He had the best yields in the paired row. And I also noticed that in our trials, we got a yield advantage with the paired row. But the holy grail, of course, on the soil health and grazing is to be able to get this nice cover crop growing in between the rows. So with that, Tom, that's all the slides that I have. I got to stop sharing. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, we are running a little bit late.